I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you!
Boring. 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 Boring.
You got it. Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's exactly what you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
Greetings, one and all. Lembedopik here on Lembedopik Live on Unprecedented TV. How are you today? Hope you're better than the British weather. I have to say I like the rain, not least because, well, I'll save the explanation for when I introduce my guest. What a busy time it has been in British politics, if you happen to be watching this live. We've got a Prime Minister who's blocked his main rival, Andy Burnham, from standing for Parliament. We've got the same Prime Minister running off to Beijing. It seems that he loves Beijing and hates Burnham. He has more in common with China than Cheshire. What an interesting situation we find ourselves in, not least because we keep being told that China is a very serious threat to British interests. As, well, just in case you don't get the impersonation Keir Starmer might say. But then he does a volte-face. He does a 180-degree U-turn and decides that China's our best mate ever. Who is to believe what in this situation? Before I introduce my guest, do please like and subscribe, ideally on Unprecedented TV's YouTube channel. We have tons and tons of shows there, and they do tend to have a rather good shelf life, not least because you can compare what we say here with what actually happens in the world. Sometimes we get it right. Mainly we do, and sometimes we get it wrong. But our mission here is to worship facts and celebrate opinions. And for that reason, we have one of the most opinionated people I know with good justification, Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, with us today. Marcus, good to see you. How are you?
Good morning, Lembit. I'm very well, thank you.
You're here because you have opinions. And while I was in Dallas last week, talking to potential investors in the station, actually, we coined the phrase that we are ruthless with facts and gracious with opinions. And that's exactly why I think the station's working. Just a quick one for you. You must be loving, but we're not really talking about this today, but you must be loving the crazy communications breakdown between Keir Starmer and others, as he just sits there bobbing on the waves of international politics. He seems to have become irrelevant.
Well, first of all, when was Keir Starmer ever relevant in the first place?
Well, he was relevant enough to become the leader of the Labour Party. Somebody must have voted for him. And indeed, Andy Burnham, who we'll be talking about in a moment, has tried to get that job and failed. So Keir Starmer has demonstrably been more popular than Andy Burnham.
Well, I think all of us would agree that Keir Starmer hardly was voted in to Downing Street by the majority of the British population. And at the same time, the voter turnout at the 2024 general election was absolutely abysmal, which is another demonstration of how the British people have finally woken up to the reality of who rules them, not governs them.
Okay, well, let's talk about this. Tempting as it is to talk about the wider political picture, for example, the relationship between Starmer and Trump, I really want to talk about this extraordinary decision, in my opinion, to block Andy Burnham, and the fact that it's happened has quite clearly shown the weakness, at least in my view, of Keir Starmer. There's the headlines everywhere. Huge mistake. Labour in turmoil as Burnham blocked from by-election race. Allies of Greater Manchester Mayor say Number 10 has chosen factionalism as decision leads to a furious backlash. Now that summarises loads of different headlines. Let me ask you a macro, large question. Starmer has taken responsibility for this. Why has he done it? I think I know what you're going to say, but let's just get down to brass tacks.
First of all, Lembit, please allow me to say the following. Andy Burnham is no friend to the British people. He is a Blairite who opposes a full inquiry into the Pakistani grooming gangs scandal. He supports Britain returning to the European Union. He supports mass immigration. He supports multiculturalism. And on top of that, he is unrepentant in his support for the illegal, barbaric, and unprovoked invasion of Iraq. So let us just remind ourselves of the nature of Andy Burnham. In regard to Starmer's stance on Burnham, well, clearly Starmer has an agenda and he has to implement the agenda. And it is not in the interests of Starmer or his handlers for there to be a leadership challenge in the Labour Party at such a crucial time, because only recently the Labour government announced that face recognition technology would henceforth be used by the police. Now, this is an exceptionally dangerous development, which many of us warned about years ago. So again, if Burnham was allowed to return to the House of Commons, he could launch a leadership challenge against Starmer. But let's just say in a scenario where Burnham becomes the leader of the Labour Party, there will be no difference whatsoever in policy. Let me just remind you and your audience of the reality of Burnham. He only supports, quote, a limited inquiry into the Pakistani grooming gang scandal. So there is no difference between Starmer and Burnham.
Well, it's interesting. And actually, I say what I'm about to say with some humility, Marcus. I have tended to regard Burnham as a step up, an improvement from Keir Starmer. I'm not in the Labour Party. I don't have a vote. But that's because Starmer's so bad. You do remind me of, also at the personal level, I always got on pretty well with him. And he's certainly more personable than Starmer. But you do remind us and the audience of those things. The grooming gang point is a big concern. And I presume, we don't know this for sure, but I presume him taking such a position and an intransigent position on something which is clearly an absolutely national scandal is because he's concerned of losing votes in Manchester, or am I being cynical?
I believe that is exactly the reason. I believe that is also the reason why Starmer and his Labour government, and I use the word government in a very loose way, are also putting obstacles in front of there being a full inquiry into the Pakistani grooming gangs scandal. The only member of Parliament who is truly a friend to the British people, who is a true British patriot, is, of course, Rupert Lowe. There is no other member of Parliament who is on the side of the British people. Rupert says it as it is. He is clearly not controlled by the British state. He is clearly not beholden to any other organization or any other corporation, anything like that. He is truly independent. Anyone who opposes a full inquiry into the grooming of thousands upon thousands of girls should be in prison for the rest of their lives. I don't care what their views are on anything else. For example, they might say that NATO brought about the war in Ukraine. I couldn't care less if they do not support a full inquiry into what happened to those poor, innocent girls who were raped, then they should have no future in politics. The only future they should have is in a Victorian-style prison for the rest of their lives, where they should be left to rot.
A lot of comments. You provoked a lot of comments here. Colin says, well said, Marcus. And also that Andy Burnham has ruined Manchester. Nick R. Snatcher says, Manchester's a property speculator wreck. Nick, you've also put some rather cryptic comments I don't completely understand there. That's the only reason I'm not reading them out. The cover-up goes above MPs, adds columnids. Ricky Sickles, greetings to you in Philippines. So many on the left protect groomers. You see a lot of it in other countries too. That's interesting. And Nick says, it's been the same all over the UK since 2003. All horrible flats. I'm paraphrasing because I don't swear on air. Soon they will suggest old homes are bad for the climate to force tenants in. That's interesting. And 15-minute gulags, adds Colin. It's obviously about 15-minute cities. Quite a lot of sympathy there. Let's talk about a couple of things here. I do want to get, before we talk about Keir Starmer generally, noted your point about Andy Burnham. It's very interesting, and you've come in very hard there. I have to say, sometimes it's possible to live in an ivory tower in broadcasting, where you compare the present with the possible and draw the wrong conclusion. Maybe I'm guilty. I've been guilty of that. I just want to talk about the process and about Keir Starmer's, in my view, extraordinary efforts to try to block Andy Burnham, accepting that you don't think Andy Burnham's an improvement. Starmer is in this weird position where he's defending blocking Andy Burnham from the by-election run, having his lackeys going around saying, oh, it's too expensive, and accidentally admitting, Marcus, that if there was a by-election for Mayor of Manchester, Reform could win it. This seems to be the last days of the Reich.
Well, worse than that is the fact that Starmer, acting on the instructions of his handlers, has cancelled elections in England. He has cancelled elections. I am 47 years of age, and I do not know a time in the last 47 years when elections were cancelled by a government in the United Kingdom. For me, that is far worse than him blocking Burnham. Again, this is an internal, fraternal quarrel going on between Starmer and his henchmen and Burnham and his henchmen. But really, the focus should be on cancelling elections. The reason why those elections have been cancelled, the reason why Burnham is not allowed to stand is for the same reason. The agenda must be implemented. There can be no delays now. So that is why 2030 is not far away. As I said moments ago, face recognition technology will now be available to the British police to, quote, catch criminals. Well, anyone who knows the nature of the British police will be simply petrified at that notion, because yes.
Go on, not you.
Face technology is all about control and surveillance, and you do not want the British police, which is the worst trained and the most vile police force in the Western world, having their hands on such technology, because again, it will be used to clamp down on political dissent.
I asked these two questions semi-rhetorically. Would facial recognition technology have speeded up solving the strange mystery of the three handsome young Ukrainian men, Ukrainian-born men, allegedly, who attacked Keir Starmer's property? And secondly, would facial recognition technology bring to justice British prime ministers who launch illegal wars in Iraq? I'm not expecting you to answer the questions there, but apparently, well, I suspect they wouldn't.
But can I just make one very quick observation?
Yeah, sure, sure.
London has the most cameras in the entire world, and yet London is one of the most dangerous of cities in the Western world. So clearly, having cameras everywhere in London is not clamping down on crime. It is not catching criminals. It is not deterring crime. So what is face recognition technology going to achieve? Again, it's all about control and surveillance.
When I was in Dallas, if you're watching this live, that was last week. You see all the gun crime stories and the focus on violence in America. I had nothing but courtesy and calm. And I know you can't measure this statistically. It's a sample of one. But I felt people weren't scared and angst-ridden. They'd greet you with a smile. In London, if you try to accost somebody, they think you're going to steal their phone. It's totally different manner. It's an extraordinary thing. In the world of woke, it seems to be far behind the land of the free when it comes to mindset. Before we go to the break, and I want to focus on Starmer more at the second half, just to finish off really on what we're talking about. Politico says Keir Starmer ruthlessly blocked a rival. Here's why it could backfire. Brutal move against Andy Burnham has already pushed back by Labour MPs disillusioned with the UK Prime Minister. Now, once again, if you're watching this live, at least 50 Labour members of Parliament have complained about Starmer's action. It seems to me what you have said, Marcus, is absolutely on the money. This government, although it blames others, this government has postponed elections, nay, cancelled them, because they're terrified of losing to reform. And if we needed any proof that we have a despotic prime minister, it's the fact that he's clearly blocked Andy Burnham on spurious grounds because he's terrified that Andy Burnham would launch a leadership challenge, notwithstanding the things that you said before. I get the fact that Andy Burnham, in your view, is very much no change at the top. But Starmer is so selfish that he would put his own political existence and continuation in Downing Street above the interests of democracy.
Yes, he would. But there's a wider point. Britain is not a democracy. One of your viewers spoke about how the left, and again, I use that word in a very loose way, the left protects some of the most atrocious of people you can come across in life. Well, the right, and I use that word in a very loose way, did exactly the same. What action did the previous Conservative administrations take in regard to the Pakistani grooming gang scandal? The answer is, of course, zero. They did nothing whatsoever. So Britain is not a democracy. Britain is a tyranny. Britain is a kleptocracy. And as I say time and time again, tyranny comes in different shapes and forms. You have an overt tyranny, such as Saudi Arabia and North Korea. Then you have a clever tyranny which masquerades as a democracy, such as the United Kingdom.
Before we go to the break, let me try and catch up with a plethora of comments, and do please keep them coming. I'm very grateful that you are all so active today. Christopher Jenner says the right rose from the ashes and reinvented themselves into the European Union. Interesting point. And it would be very interesting to see the genealogy, the history of some of the people near the top and at the top of the European Union. Nick says if it walks like a Reich, quacks like a Reich. I like that. Not forgetting the World Economic Forum, adds Christopher. Columnist says the Rothschilds won, whoever won. Nick says there are a lot of left-wing freaks in Dallas. It's a hotbed. Well, I was told actually that Austin was the liberal, and the American sense of liberal capital. I went there as well. Once again, I had a good experience. I met an incredibly clever man actually while I was there. That's a story for another time. Column stats known as a fixed race. Nick mentions cannibalism. Not sure quite what the reference is, but you have piqued my interest there. They want Manchester to be the new Shanghai ads, Nick. And Collins used to say Manchester used to be okay. Now it's a tip. And Nick adds, UK has not been a capitalist country since 2008. And just one more before we go to the break, from Ricky Sickles: follow the money, and who has the dirt, which is very interesting. And Defer2 says Texas should be a separate state. Get more of your comments in a minute there. Before we go any further, though, let me talk to you about somebody who actually saw it. If you're watching this live, I saw her last night. Claire Dyer does great work. She's an absolute trooper. And she also runs Dire Consequences. Do have a look at the back catalogue. We're doing some more shows coming up soon. She has some great guests, but more than anything, she is a tireless trooper for exactly the kind of free speech that myself and Marcus believe in, and the station believes in. Have a look at this. Yes, that's Claire Dyer with Dire Consequences, one of the absolute troopers here at the wonderful offices, I like to think, of Unprecedented TV. Please do like and subscribe. I often say that, but we really appreciate it when you do. Now, back to Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, sorry. Just one more word about the Starmer situation in the past, then I want to talk about the bigger situation. Some say that Starmer's now isolated. Regardless of whether you think Starmer's better or worse than Burnham, it says here, Ethan Cross says this, I think this might be from the New Statesman, I can't remember. This is a decision that will be entirely put at the door of the Prime Minister. There's going to be a by-election, the one that Burnham wanted to stand in. I think this has become a referendum on Keir Starmer, because Burnham, whether you like him or not, would probably have won it. He certainly had the best chance of winning it. He's pretty popular in Manchester, or has been. Do you think if Labour loses, Starmer's in trouble, or is that going too far?
I think it's going too far. I do believe that far too much importance is being attached to this issue when we consider the bigger picture. Starmer was selected and installed as Prime Minister because there is nothing he will not do to serve his handlers. He is doing things which people like, for example, Sunak, another useful idiot, simply would not have done. So when the British ruling elite has had enough of Starmer, when they feel that he has served his purpose, then they will get rid of him. Maybe they will install Burnham as leader, maybe not. But we have to remember that Starmer is not an independent operator. He is not an independent Prime Minister. He is demonstrating that on a daily basis. No serious person in Britain, or indeed in other countries in the world, really believes that he is in control of the United Kingdom, like no one seriously believes that Rachel Reeves is running the UK economy.
Rachel Reeves, a woman who unfortunately had a very misleading CV and turned out to be in the complaints department rather than any significant senior economic role, as far as I understand it. I do want to move on from this, but we've had all of the lackeys and all of these people coming up to defend the decision. It's fairly pathetic in my view. This is one of them, Reid, housing minister. I was shadow housing minister once. And they're all saying things like, oh, well, we shouldn't have an election for mayor because it's costly and it's distracting. I found all of their arguments entirely implausible. it does seem to me that the whole of the Labour Party now looks utterly foolish on the basis of this internal fiasco. And it all falls at the door of Starmer.
Well, they all want to preserve their big fat paychecks that they receive at the end of each month. Again, no one is seriously going to attach importance to what Steve Reed has to say. No different to what John Healey, the Defence Secretary, has to say. A man who has no military experience whatsoever, and only recently, Lembit said that he would support the abduction of Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Putin being brought to the West to be put on trial.
Incredible. Why doesn't Putin then say, if he abducts Volodymyr Zelensky, say, we've abducted Volodymyr Zelensky, give him a fair trial on corruption charges? This is one of the symmetries which I don't get particularly. If you can abduct Maduro,
another for thee. It's as simple as that. But I say to John Healey, well, why don't you go and do it yourself? If you're that much of a man, if you're that much of a military man, why don't you go to Russia, penetrate the walls of the Kremlin, and abduct Putin yourself?
I love it. I have to say, I love the idea of Healey going there. Healey's one of those people, when you're talking, you just feel that he's a sort of remote control robot, and somebody's got a keyboard and they've mistyped things in, and he just says them. Healey's, I don't know, I can't remember if what impression I had of him when I was more active in British Parliament, but he just comes across as cardboard. And also this idea, I know this is a digression, but I'll indulge myself briefly and get back on point. He's one of those people who wants us to believe that Russia might actually invade and conquer Britain, that we have to be ready in case Russia rolls across. You wake up in the morning and there's a red in your bed, or at least underneath it. And they say these things with a straight face. I got more reason than most to hate the Soviet Union and Russia. And I don't. I just don't. This is crazy, maybe. I don't believe that Russia's about to roll across Europe and trying to occupy France, Germany, Belgium, and then nip across. Though, of course, we know that the Channel's hardly defended. All you need to do is have unarmed men and fighting age in boats. And probably the British Army would help them come across, as far as I can see.
Yes, they certainly would. As you said, all the Russian soldiers need to do is jump into dinghies, and they will land at Dover. But somehow, I think that if it was detected that there were Russians in the English Channel, then the Royal Navy would be deployed. But again, in regard to John Healey and Steve Reed and the rest of them, they are the dregs of society, and the reason why they are in Parliament is because they are the dregs of society. The British ruling elite does not want independent thinking, critical thinking people in the House of Commons. Why? Because independent and critical thinking people cannot be deceived and manipulated as easily as dregs of society can be.
You're causing a huge amount of commentary here. Let me try and catch up with some of it. We've got, I'll just try and catch up again. I want to encourage comments, so please do keep them coming. Apologies if I don't get to yours, but you have been so wonderful. Nick Arsnatcher says, UK public have become spineless because nobody wants to cause a fuss and ruin their house prizes. Colin says, Farage is setting fire to his own party. That's the subject of a different time. Colin says, none of them can be trusted, but I would trust Lowe. So there's some agreement with your view there. Both people will be guarding them, says Colin of Nick's comment. If your old house doesn't meet strict climate regulations, you'll have to move to one of these investor flats. A lot of people are quite cynical here. Ricky says, look at the leftist protesters in the states supporting rapists and killers to try and keep them in the states. Many protesting are just sheep following the wolves. That's a subject I'll be covering on another day, Ricky, but I read it out now because it's an interesting point. Nick says a challenging question about domestic arrangements for the Prime Minister, which I won't repeat. Comments about other parts of the Middle East there. Christopher Jennison's The Reich rose from the ashes. We had that one again. Sorry about that. And just a few more here. The king would normally step in, but he's being got at too, suggests Carlamids. Questions of whether certain royalty are traitors. I don't want to be done for treason, so I'll not read that one out. Nick says Austin is a pot smoker woke city. I saw no evidence of that, actually, when I was there. While Dallas is a cult left-wing city, didn't see evidence of that either with rumors of people cooking and eating corpses. Referred to as cannibal parties. I see, thank you. Fascinating. I'll ask my woman in Dallas about that. Blair infiltrated MI5. Well, he was meant to be in charge of it, actually, but there we are. Who's voting for Burnham, though, Lembit, asks Columnids. And Rachel Reeves. It's caused a lot of laughter, your comments there about Rachel Reeves. She's now a common swear word, apparently. Yes, you've been reeved. That's supposed to be another word for bankruptcy. The royals have always leaned towards the left. Charles follows his family with WEF and globalism, suggests Christopher. There's a whole debate about royal family there. I want to read them all, but we're just running out of time. Christopher, if the West abducted Putin, The Hague would be Russian within hours. That's an interesting point. Yeah. I mean, frankly, if the Russians did want to invade, they've got the conventional resources to do it. Colin says, come in, the water is lovely. Russia makes more money from selling energy to the EU, suggests Ricky. And just one more from Deepa. Like Catherine, Austin Fitz said, we have to not comply and keep chipping away at their plans. Oh, sorry. And Les Ames says, Marcus mentioned Starmer's handlers. Who was he referring to? Who are you referring to?
The hearts of the British ruling elite, which is, of course, the monarchy, followed by the aristocracy. Then you have the banking elites, the financial elites, the military chiefs, the intelligence chiefs. But the heart of the British ruling elite is the monarchy. No one should think the monarchy has been penetrated. Are we really going to believe that people with blue hair have penetrated the monarchy? No, the monarchy is at the root of all that we see happening in Britain, and I would also argue across the rest of the Western world.
Meanwhile, back to the ruling elite puppet, you would say, Keir Starmer. Having made an enemy of Burnham, he seems to want to love Beijing, but he hasn't got a great record of looking credible there. This is a headline from actually a couple of years ago, but it seems strangely relevant, Marcus. What it says here is, does Britain have any leverage over human rights or security concerns, or is it a decaying nation that cannot risk trade relations? As always, Starmer looks like a loser in a sharp suit. That's what I think he is. I think him going to China, once again, if you're watching this live, this is his latest jaunt. Apparently, there's no problem with emissions anymore. The climate emergency doesn't apply to Keir Starmer making pointless trips around the world. I don't understand, though. First of all, two questions for you. I'll ask them at once. Do you think Britain's a decaying state? And the second one is, why does Starmer keep telling us, and his lackeys keep telling us, that China's a big threat, and then he goes off and tries to suck up to Xi Jinping? I don't understand.
Well, firstly, I believe that the people who rule Britain have no love for Britain. And Britain, as I have said for a number of years now, is dead. And it was murdered and it was killed deliberately. The British people aren't dead. The British people have an opportunity to win this war, but Britain is dead. In regard to the second question, this is a most curious subject because on the one hand, the British state says that China poses a threat to the national security of the United Kingdom. MI5, the British Secret Police, and MI6, officially known as SIS, British Foreign Intelligence, has said that time and time again. But on the other hand, the British state continues to intensify its economic relationship with China. It continues to increase its trade and investment policy with China. Exactly what the Americans are doing. On the one hand, the Americans say that China is a threat to America, but on the other hand, the Americans continue to integrate their economy with the Chinese economy. So what is the true situation? What is the truth here? Well, I will say this, Lembit. I will pay credit where credit is due. The Chinese Communist Party has achieved very impressive accomplishments. For example, when it comes to the economy, when it comes to education, when it comes to health, when it comes to transport, we should all recognize that. However, I believe that the Chinese state and the British state and the American state are two sides of the same coin. So, for example, when it comes to the climate change scam, the turbo farms, or the wind farms that we see all across Britain, which is devastating the British countryside, killing vast amounts of birds. Where do these wind farms come from? They're produced in China. China doesn't want them. So China is more than happy to sell these repulsive, dangerous things to Britain. So clearly, China is not a threat to British national security. It's not a threat to American national security. If it was, why is the British state continuing to deepen its economic relationship with the Chinese? You don't do that with an enemy. And if China is an enemy, then Britain would sever diplomatic relations with the Chinese. But they don't do that. And also we have all this technology coming from China, controlling technology, surveillance technology that the British ruling elite is now implementing in Britain. So it's a very, very murky picture, but clearly they are two sides of the same coin.
Yes, it's a strange thing for me. There's a huge chat. I'm sorry, I haven't got time to go through all of this. Coleman says, even though we are under attack, we still have our British sense of humour, which I think is true. Nick Snatcher said that I wish a good deal. I switched a good deal of my money from currency to gold and silver because the pound might go the same way of the dodo. Coleman suggests silver's a good bet. And quite a massive, fascinating subject here. I've also spent a lot of money investing in Falklands oil fields, says Nick. I didn't know there were any. They need China's chips, suggests Columnids. I take it they mean microchips, or nanochips, maybe they're called now. New quantum chips coming soon. This get have been left out, adds Columnids. Thanks for clarification there. I also bought a lot of palladium, says Nick, because it's needed for supercomputers and it's really, really rare. That's interesting. I've invested in regenerative agriculture, says Deepa too, and the commercial market garden, getting the local food production going. Good for you, Deepa. The markets will close you down, suggests Nick. We're decades behind China in tech. Just look at their trains. Affordable energy as well, good point. And range controlled with the laptops, says Ricky Sickles. Now, we've got a little picture, and I think that sums up, well, there we go. We've seen that one. Can we just get the little logo thing? There, yeah, I think that's the contradiction. Made in China, with a danger sign, essentially. Much, if not most of what we buy, which is made, comes from China, including the chips that probably go into our military weapons. I don't know. And I have to say, this schizophrenia that we've got, I have no problem buying things from China. I'm actually very fond of China. I was in the just when I became an MP in 1997. I'd have moved with my big American company. I wanted to live in Guangzhou. I loved the place, or Hong Kong at the time. I just thinking, how does anyone? Is there any justification? Is there any logic you can think of, Marcus, by which we say that China is a big, clear, and present threat to us, but we buy much or most of what's produced from China, having shut down our own manufacturing?
I can only think that this is a way of trying to distract public attention away from the true relationship between London and Beijing. I think that the British ruling elite and also the Chinese are creating an illusion, because the Chinese also say that, for example, America is a threat to them. But it goes back to what I said. Let me put it on a very simple level. If you believe that someone is a threat to you and your family, you will have nothing to do with that person. You will not talk to them. You will avoid them when walking down the street. You will not do business with that person. It is no different. So again, why is the British ruling elite and why is the American deep state continuing to intensify their economic relationships with the Chinese? If the Chinese pose a national security threat to Britain and America, it is, of course, ludicrous talk. It is nonsensical. You do not have anything to do with someone or a government or a country which is threatening you. So I can only infer that it is a cover. And once again, I am not anti-Chinese. I'm not pro-Chinese. I wish the Chinese the best of luck in their country, but not in my country. I don't want their wind farms in my country. I don't want their control and surveillance technology being brought into my country. But who is bringing this into Britain? Well, it's not the Chinese, it's the British ruling elite. The British ruling elite are an enemy to the British people. That is why we should understand that we, the British people, are at war. We didn't start this war. The British state has gone to war with us.
Well, a couple more comments, and then I'm going to ask you two other questions. We've got to finish. One is, I told you, this is about my plans to go to China. I told you ages ago, Lembit, don't live in China, says Christopher. Your building will disintegrate. It's a risk I'd take, because at the moment, as far as I can see, my country is disintegrating. And Deepa 2 says 100% right, Marcus. I want to ask you these questions. First of all, how could we ever beat that? If we ever went to a war with China, how could we ever beat that? That's a tiny little minuscule fraction of the Chinese army, which I think is around 2.5 million. We've got theoretically 87,000, including everybody. The whole of the British army, including the non-combatants and the secretaries and the cooks and the mechanics, would fit into Wembley Stadium with space to spare. Well, we could never win, could we?
Can I make a quick observation?
Yeah, sure.
Of course, Britain's power, or I should say the British ruling elite's power in the world lies elsewhere. And I am referring to the city of London. That is where the British ruling elite have immense influence over China and indeed over America. And turning to the Chinese military, the Chinese military has made enormous progress in recent years. However, in my books and in speeches and on television for the last 20 or so years, I have described the Chinese military, the People's Liberation Army, as, quote, the largest armed forces museum in the world. Much of the Chinese military equipment is obscure. Yes, they have a vast amount of soldiers, but their technology, their rocket missile technology, for example, does not compare to the American military technology or to Russian military technology. Yes, the Chinese Air Force has a 5th generation aircraft, fighter plane. Good, they've done very well with that. They've put it in the air, but they don't have the high technology for the cockpits. That is why the Chinese have been asking the Russians for a long time now to supply them with the technology for the cockpit for their 5th generation fighter planes. And the Russians, whilst they have a strategic partnership with the Chinese, are apprehensive about doing that. I have long regarded and I've long written about the Russian-Chinese relationship as it being not a relationship of affinity, but rather a relationship of necessity.
Let's bring this together then where I suppose we need to go. There's Keir Starmer. following in the footsteps of Xi Jinping. He's got problems at home. He flies off all the time. I was thinking when I was listening on the news to the story that Keir Starmer's flown off to China again, I guess Beijing. I'm not sure where he's going. The last person I want to have representing us in China is him. I'd send our best people, not our worst. What good can come of Keir Starmer going to Beijing? Because, and I'll answer the question myself, and I'll leave you the last word. I don't think he has the intellectual agility to have an equal conversation with Xi Jinping any more than he can do with Donald Trump, who seems to be far his intellectual superior. So what good, if anything, can come of his meeting?
Well, I would answer that question, Lembit, by posing a counter question. Who exactly are our, quote, best people who could be sent to China? Who in the House of Commons? Who on the Labour benches, on the government benches, would you send to China instead of Starmer? Rachel Reeves? Maybe David Lammy?
Rachel Reeves came back with a £300 million deal, which was roughly one Chinese takeaway, the equivalent of buying one Chinese takeaway for every household in the UK.
Well, then send David Lammy. He's obviously far superior. I mean, after all, he's a highly intelligent man. He demonstrated that on Mastermind.
I never ceased to enjoy sharing the fact that he thought that Henry VII took over the throne after Henry VIII died. I'm very sympathetic to what you're saying. I'd send a delegation of intelligent business people who want to do business with China. That's who I'd send. I'd send people who have the authority to do serious business. But the problem we've got now is we've got an industry entirely hamstrung by the ludicrous energy policies, which just keep getting worse, which means that it's far cheaper from an energy perspective to make almost anything in China compared to here. So I don't see him coming back with anything other than some pathetic set of photographs that causes him to look inferior to Xi Jinping.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. I would just add this. Keir Starmer is, of course, delivering a message to the Chinese. He is simply a mouthpiece for the British ruling elite. Yes, it's embarrassing to have an utter imbecile like him officially representing the British people in China, but let us not lose sight of the fact he is merely a messenger boy. That is what he's paid to do. He's paid to be a messenger boy. He's paid to implement an agenda, a most malignant, sinister agenda. But I agree, Lembit, it is a complete embarrassment to have a major idiot like him representing the British people on the international scene.
I was at a political meeting last night, and it just never ceases to amaze me, just in those quiet moments, or when people ask me about him, things like, why is Keir Starmer the Prime Minister? It never ceases to amaze me that he is. It's extraordinary. When I grew up, Marcus, I was taught that education was the secret to success. And then you see people like Keir Starmer, David Lammy, who weirdly has some sort of a qualification from Harvard, and Angela Rayner, who has barely any qualifications at all, variously running bits of the country. Meanwhile, China is churning out 5 million university graduates a year. We haven't got a hope, have we?
Well, we don't, but we need to focus on the war, and there is a war, and people must understand that. And indeed, many people do realize that the British state has gone to war with the British people. So yes, it's an embarrassment, but I'm focused on domestic affairs. I'm focused on winning this war. They announced recently that face recognition technology would be given to the police. This now needs to be confronted. This is extremely dangerous. They want to abolish cash. They said they have shelved the idea of digital ID. No, they haven't. They will return to it, or they will try and bring it in through the back door. They're not stopping illegal immigrants entering the country. They're continuing to flood the country with illegal immigrants, which is devastating the country, which is devastating to the British demographic. We are at war.
And who wins that war in the end?
Well, in my opinion, well, if we don't win this war, if the British people do not win this war, then it means enslavement and death. And as some of your viewers will know what I say, I would rather be dead and free than alive and a slave.
I'll just finish with a couple of comments here and then we're done. Time's racing on. Turning us into data-hungry robots, suggests Colin. Clinton gave, Ricky Sickle says Clinton gave China their rocket tech by allowing Ingram Core to sell their tech to China. Don't know what that company is, but there we are. Sleepwalking and self-destruction, suggests deferred to. And one more, which is, oh, you're right, Marcus, says Colin. It's very much agreeing with you there. And defer finishing with this. Degrees don't give you the practical skills we are going to need when AI steals all those desk jobs. And Colin says, good show, chaps, thank you. And on that, we should finish. Thank you so much, Marcus. I really appreciate your time. That's Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos. I'll just add one thing. I think we've never been more badly served by our politicians. I've never seen a Downing Street so incompetently run, or a Prime Minister so scared that he'll block Burnham in Manchester, but fly to Beijing in a hurry. I would say that the sign of a true leader is to win at home and reach out abroad instead of lose at home and hide abroad. That's my view. You can have yours as well. Please do like and subscribe at Unprecedented TV on YouTube. We have so much going on. It's been a busy beginning of 2026. And do enjoy the archive as well. But please, more than anything, like and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. It helps us a lot. I'm Lembedopic. That was the Lembedopic live show on Unprecedented TV. Have a good day.
Immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The return of the sausages.